Hello and welcome back to The Next Big Thing. My name is Chris Gennady, Global Head of Research at WisdomTree, and today I am joined by a very special guest, Siwei Lyu, a fellow of the IEEE and IAPR, SUNY Empire Innovation Professor in the Department of Computer Science and Engineering, the Director of the University of Buffalo Media Forensic Lab, and an expert in the area of deepfakes. And as we're doing this recording, it is the second half of September. It's an election year in many countries, but we're coming up on the U.S. election. So the topic of deepfakes, it couldn't be a better topic or a better time to be talking about this. But before we get into the fun stuff, I do need to state the following. To clarify, the views and opinions expressed in this podcast are those of WisdomTree and our guests, and are subject to change. Anything we present in this podcast is not intended to be relied upon as a forecast, research, nor as investment or tax advice. The information and opinions expressed in this podcast are not a recommendation, offer, or solicitation to buy or sell any securities, and reliance upon them is at the sole discretion of the listener. Please remember, past performance is no indication of future results. And so with that introduction, Siwei, I'd be curious to hear a bit about, the origin of your interest in artificial intelligence, the journey that you've taken. Obviously, it probably had numerous different steps, and to get to ultimately where you are today with all those very interesting positions at University of Buffalo.
Thank you, Grace, for having me today. It's really a great pleasure to have a chat with you about my research and some of the things I'm very passionate about. Well, to start, I started my grad school in Dartmouth College 2001, so that's 23 years ago. And I was very fortunate. The first class we at Dartmouth was actually to have senior faculties to give like a platter of their research projects, give us a way to see what are the cutting edge research was done at the time. And the first lecture I was in was delivered by Professor Hani Farid, and he's one of the pioneers in this burgeoning field called digital media forensics at the time. Back then, it was mostly about digital editing of images, and using Photoshop was a relatively new thing back then. People were so worried about people can, somebody can change the images we're seeing using Photoshop. So Hani gave this very engaging talk and immediately caught my attention. And I feel like this is a research area that's so interesting, that is combining my interest in pattern recognition, machine learning, artificial intelligence. That back then it was not called machine learning; it was called pattern recognition. At the same time, I can see a strong social impact. So that's all started my interest in this research area. I did my thesis in media forensics, exposing digitally manipulated or fabricated images back then. That was 2005. And afterwards, I kind of wandered into a kind of strange academic career path. I went out to NYU for a postdoc where I studied human vision. And I feel like a lot of the reason I chose that partially is because the more I look into the problem of digital image forgeries, the more I realize it's not just a technical problem. A lot of times we fall for it simply because our perceptual systems, to be more specific, our eyes and visual cortex were not particularly, I'll say, adapted to the kind of manipulation we're seeing. So we're not seeing them not because we're not good at them. It's because we're just not our system are not built to see those manipulations. So I took 3 years studying human vision, coming up with mathematical models of the cognitive and neural biological mechanism of human vision. And then I come back as a faculty in computer science at the University at Albany for 12 years, where I started to apply what I learned in grad school and as my postdoc research to study image manipulation. So we have a series of work on image manipulation using statistical models and human vision, mathematical model for human visions, combine them together to expose, like people copy paste a region into a digital image or splice in another region from a region from a different image into an image, making digital forgeries. So that's the thing I focus on most of the time. But on the other hand, I'm always interested in machine learning, AI, and I'm typically I'm a very visual person. I like to see understand how we humans, our brains understand visual information. How do we extract those structures from the images we're seeing? Um, so I do another line. My work is on computer vision, on generating and restoring degraded images. And then I start to see the rapid development of artificial intelligence, especially deep learning, deep neural networks in this area of image synthesis and editing. And it was about, I think 2015, 2016, I started wondering, one day I think these two worlds, uh, namely AI for image editing or creation, will collide with my another research area using algorithms, using AI to detect image forgery, and that happened late in 2017. I think in November, we had the first report about people using AI to create realistic human faces and put them into pornographic videos and spread them online. And that also give us the name Deepfake, because that's the account name for the Reddit user, the Reddit handle, who started to share this kind of information. And I think that's the kind of official birthday for deepfakes. I know about deepfakes in January of 2018, so that's about a month after. In a conference, it was a conversation I had with Hani, my PhD advisor, and we started to talk about what are the recent things, and he brought to my attention this new phenomenon of deepfakes, and immediately I got interested, and that started. I shift my research area to more of the AI-driven media manipulation, and how do we mitigate with that. So I started developed deepfake detection algorithms for for most part of 2018, 2019, and I started to get report coverage, news coverage as media. People come to me and ask to analyze deepfakes, and that's the part I started to understand, almost like my revelation 20 years, 15, 20 years ago, that this is not just a technical problem. It's like there's a human vision problem, but beyond that, there is a social problem. We fall for deepfakes not because many times it's not because we cannot tell them apart from the real media, but it's because we're not aware. We're not. We don't have the level of awareness that AI is so powerful that can change, manipulate media in the way the makers want to be. So I started to shift my understanding and my research interest into more understanding, what is the social, psychological factors behind this, and how do we do something to change that situation, combined with my technical effort. So that's where I started to look into the broader impact of deepfakes, and also how to inform our public, different demographic groups about the situation. So we work on one of the outcome of this kind of research is a project called DART, D-A-R-T, that stands for Deception Awareness and Resilience Tools. So what we do there is provide mobile games and online learning platforms, particularly for older adults, to understand what are what are AI, what are generative AI, what are deepfakes and what kind of consequences they can cause, especially when they were used together with frauds, targeting to gain financial interest, financial gains over them. So I mean, those are the things I'm doing a lot of things. I testified at the Congress on the situation of deepfakes. I help local state governments, state law enforcement agencies to, and also legal experts to understand the situation and provide expert opinions on this kind of issues. I also talk with a lot of reporters, journalists across the world, different U.S., Canada, India, China, Europe. So all across the places, especially for those global South regions. So I helped reporters in Indonesia, Brazil, and India during their election, and have some first-hand experience of the deepfakes impacts on local politics over there. So, I mean, it's kind of hard to put everything I've done in just a few sentences, but I hope this give you an overview, maybe a prolonged overview.
Yeah. No, it's amazing. And in thinking about it, one of the because it's interesting to sort of think back over, say, a 22, 23-year period, going back to 2001, where you're not even using the term yet, deepfakes, for, it would be 16 or so years before that term even comes up. Digital media forensics, the digital editing of images. And one of the things, I admit, as you were describing the journey, I was curious about, because there's sort of this underlying hypothesis that an outsider such as myself might have, where you just say, well, the processing power is better and the model is better, so that's why today deepfakes are this bigger problem than they would have been. But you also mentioned the idea of a mathematical model of human vision. And what I was wondering, if you had an opinion on, is the system getting better at sort of manipulating human vision and like fooling us in that way, or is the system just doing a better job at assembling the pixels, and because the processing power is better, that's why ultimately we can be fooled more often? I'm just curious, like, where the progress has been in terms of making this a bigger issue, or if it is as simple as just saying there's more processing power, that's it, period.
I think, yeah, that's a good question. I think it's all of that. Actually, we're seeing the problem we have now. I think, of course, one of the fundamental reason is human visual system are not developed in a way to detect artifacts that easily. So we have, there are a lot of psychological neurobiological study that certain artifacts just very hard to be detected by human eyes or human ears for audios. So there's this fundamental reason. Technical development is another reason. Used to be like, if you have to do this in Photoshop, you have to have some skill, some experience doing that. Now with all this automatic AI tools, things become super easy. Manipulating images, generating new images, even videos, audios, and you can have a full package of audio visual deepfakes, and everything. I recently worked this with my students. We can create highly realistic videos with voices, just starting from an idea and assemble all the available AI tools, so that what you are seeing and listening to, every single pixel and every sound sample was made by AI. It's completely made up, and you just started with some idea. And even the script come from things like large language model like ChatGPT. So you can say this is 100%, almost 100% fake. So the process obviously becomes much easier, much faster, and the quality becomes much better. And this is all driven underneath by the growing computation power. I think the third factor is the fact that they're also coming to us with large quantities, and they're chipping away our time to actually look at them. I say deepfakes or media manipulations are not, they're fundamental limitations for human perception. But that doesn't just say every deepfakes come out of the AI generation tools will be hard for ordinary user. There are a lot of artifacts that are still pretty obvious. But the problem is, we're on social media, right? So we are pretty preoccupied by reading posts, getting connected with our friends and colleagues. Um, and usually deepfakes sneak into that cognitive process. And also because the social media using recommendation algorithms, our attention span on each of the media is so short that even there are some obvious artifacts will be hard to notice. So they flood our information system, make it very, very hard to tell the differences. I think that the fourth factor, this is it may be more related with the current social media ecosystem, is the fact that we also, experience, perceive each media on social platform with a pre-existing opinion. And the existence of social media actually polarize these opinions, put people into what somebody call information cocoon or echo rooms. So when we watch something with a preset opinion, sometimes it's again, obscure those artifacts, and we go for the message more uh, than the media content themselves. So I think all these factors adding up together make deepfakes a real threat to information integrity now. Yeah.
And it's amazing to think of this, in the context of an election year, where obviously we have on the one side Kamala Harris, Vice President currently, and then former President Trump, and you're exactly right in the sense that there is this perception that if deepfakes are a problem, they would tend to occur in these ways in potentially these counties in the different swing states, and they make certain candidates look like they do one thing or another thing, and they sort of go off on their way and possibly convince people of things that never happen. And as someone that is running a media forensics, image forensics type of lab, admittedly, it sometimes appears as though some of the heads, leaders at some of the world's largest companies with billions of users either per day or per month, however it's measured,
Mm.
with so many different images. As an outsider, we tend to say, look at the free cash flow, the market cap, the resources these companies have. You sit back and you say, if they wanted to take deepfakes off the platform, let's say, you imagine there's got to be a way to do it. But from looking into the matter a little bit, it may not necessarily be that easy. And I was curious to ask you, essentially, what are the challenges in a big platform company? We all know that they're out there, basically being able to have sort of that 100% certainty of being able to detect, this video, image, audio, whatever it might be, was developed by AI, and this one over here. And maybe the first step is just separating. This is developed by AI 100%. This is developed by reality. And what I've looked at so far is it's not necessarily easy to make that sort of separation, at least with 100% certainty, if I have that right.
That's right. Yeah. So even though we have the detection of deepfakes is relatively, I'll say, underdeveloped up to this point, and you're absolutely right. The detection algorithm is not like 100 give you 100% accuracies. These algorithms are statistical based, so they return answers about likelihood of some media being AI generated. But their performance are improving, over the years. I think we are, some of the best performing algorithms we should have in the lower 90s accuracy, 90% of accuracy. So they cannot completely replace, they cannot be 100% reliable, but you can say they're largely reliable. I think but the detection problem by itself is a complicated, it's a very challenging problem. So improving from 90s to 95 is going to be very challenging, because the media coming on the platform, being uploaded to the platform, could undergo many different operations, and a lot of them could hide the traces of their AI generated nature, so making detection harder. Um, but besides the technical challenges, I think there are also a huge barrier, that is, basically the recommendation or the profit making models for the platforms. One thing, we know the social platforms, um, uh, uh, make profit by user attention. The more some user watch a certain piece of media, the more attention they will have, and then that will bring in more profits for the platform companies. And it turns out that actually people just studied recently. There was a psychological study, psychological study, showing that people are more drawn to news that are, or media contents that are interesting, sensational, out of normal. In that sense, AI generation is a very effective tool to make the polished, or to make up a story that will draw people's attention. So the more attention they will draw, the better it will gain, for the social platforms. So I think that's a fundamental conflict between keeping the information system, keeping the integrity of the information system, and making money out of the content on the social media. So that's one of the, I think, one of the reasons that's make this kind of like have a resistance or friction of implementing those filtering algorithms on the social platforms. I wouldn't say nothing was done there. Some of the most violent or explicit, or heavily political oriented intended contents, AI generated, will be filtered out, just same way as other inappropriate contents on social platform. But I'm just saying, the level this is enforced is probably limited due to that conflict with the profit making models.
I'd love to hear, earlier you were sort of mentioning how in Indonesia, Brazil,
Mm.
India, they've had elections, and obviously it may be the case that the way that they either perceive or think about these issues may be different than the way that they're thought about in the U.S. So I'd love to hear, when you're engaging and talking to, be it Indonesian officials, Brazilian officials, Indian officials, whatever the case may be, what are some of those differences in terms of how they see this problem and want to ultimately deal with it?
Well, I didn't speak with the officials there, but
Oh,
mostly these are reporters.
oh, reporters. Sorry, sorry.
Journalists. No, but the journalists play a very important role there, to for truth finding, fact checking on those claims. I think for those countries, it's kind of an interesting environment, because all these countries are relatively poor, and the citizens there have a lower level of, I would say, media literacy, information literacy, but they are started rely on smartphones for their lives. They get information from smartphones. They found a very convenient platform to talk to people on their smartphones. So they become much easier to be influenced by information spread on social media, social media software running on their smartphones, and they have, relatively speaking, like reliable alternative sources for information. Either there's not so much of newspaper, public media, or there's something that is heavily controlled by the government or influenced by different different interest groups. So it is a lot harder. So the situation is they tend to believe more what they learned from social media. Like in the case of Indonesia, that was during one of the I think it was a local election for a mayor, and there are some deepfake videos spread out, and showing that the person involved was involving in some improper behaviors, and people tend to believe that, and that's actually influenced the decision of the voters. So that's something that I look into that. I come up with so it. What the interesting about that is they think about this as deepfake, but sometimes you can claim a you know it's a dubious nature. Just pointing out that this is the case, this is what's showing, and the face involved in the video of interest was not even clearly showing that person's face, but somebody claimed this is that person is enough to persuade many of the voters to believe that. Same situation happened in India. That was earlier this year when they have the general election. There's so many disinformation there. This coming, not as videos, but also images, and also articles. So I think they're facing another problem is this coming from everywhere, and the journalists simply running out of bandwidth to deal with this problem. So there are low resources, lower level of literature, media literacy. I think combine this together and with less reliable alternative information sources make the situation worse there. And that's where I think we should whatever kind of help we can provide to them is will be very useful.
What you were saying made me think of this case where in say the U.S. world, there is that discussion about sending large amounts of money to Ukraine to support the war effort, and there was the case of basically making it seem that the wife of the Ukrainian president was suddenly shopping on some very rich streets, the equivalent of Fifth Avenue, possibly even Fifth Avenue in New York. And it was a sort of disinformation campaign from Russia for obvious reasons. And you step back, and one of the other sort of interesting factors here, which relates to what you were saying, it's almost like money laundering in the sense that if the source of whatever the post, whatever the media is obviously from Russia, then no one's going to pick it up. No one's going to spread it because everyone's going to say, oh, it's obviously from Russia. It's fake. But if they can somehow disguise the source and make, a credible influencer, that kind of person, actually like repost it or refollow it or retweet it, whatever the expression appropriately could be there, then suddenly it has now the imprimatur, the credibility of that
Right.
person, and now the original source, which is obviously has its motives, that is taken away. So in a sense, you almost have the media,
Mm.
which might be getting better and better, and then you have this ability to also try to disguise the source. And you feel like in today's world, you have to do a good job at both to have a chance of sort of that viral story.
Yes, absolutely. I think this is it's riding on the wave of spread the on the riding on the widespread of social media and the multitude of opinions on social media. And so deepfake is as a technology, I think um, what we are seeing today, at least some precursor of the ability we're seeing of AI generated images, audios, and videos that exists in principle in a I would say much rougher shape exists at least 10 years ago, 20 years ago, like 2005 when I was a postdoc. Where I study my research topic is actually on generating images using statistical models. So that's like a precursor of AI generating realistic images. It's just back then we do not have the computation power we only create like 8x8 patches that looks like a real image patches. So what have been changed is the technology. So in that sense, I think this is the technology doesn't it's just getting involved, and it's riding on the increasing computation power we have that we are seeing deepfakes today. But the other thing I want to mention is the intention of manipulating media to influence users' opinion is not new either. So I mean, deepfakes is like the most frequent topic about disinformation, misinformation. But I want to say you don't need AI to create disinformation, misinformation. A lot of the misinformation we actually are seeing are coming from real media taken out of context. So they're as dangerous as deepfakes. So as I'm working on deepfake detection, I always want to remind the public that it's like another tip of the iceberg. The bigger problem is the general low quality, low level integrity of information on social platforms. So we should the best the way we think about this is deepfakes is one measure for one tool for creating disinformation, but there are many other ways they can be created and spread. So we should pay attention to, again, the fundamental question, if this is something that's reality or not, instead of focus solely on AI generated deepfakes. Yeah.
I'd love to hear, you had indicated you spoke to Congress, and
Mm.
possibly there answered questions or spoken to some different representatives. What in sort of that sort of area of the policy space in the U.S. Are there any sort of themes or questions that they seem to be particular? You indicated the vast majority here would be, if we could solve or do something with this problem in an effective way, it could help women, it could help people in sort of disadvantageous positions, alleviate important sources of stress, which seems like something that might make sense on a policy agenda, but was just wondering if that's the main topic that comes up, or if they're also questioning about other topics.
Well, I think the government, as a matter of fact, I'm going to testify at the New York State Assembly Friday on this topic. So that public hearing, is focuses on uh, deepfakes, um, uh, generative AI's negative impacts on consumer privacy and safety. It's just that's another topic. That's one like a big impact of deepfakes. Um, but from my past experience testifying in at the U.S. Congress, New York State Senate, and the upcoming New York State Assembly, I think the focus has been the government from both federal and state governments level, focusing on policies and regulations about mitigating the risk of deepfakes. There are a few. I think there are a few of the effective measures as a matter of as a result of these efforts, is regulations on the most violent form of deepfakes and stop them from spreading. For instance, deepfakes targeting women and causing consequences, lead to significant consequences. Those are the deepfakes that need to be prohibited to spread and need to be stopped at the first place. And I think quite a few, several states like California already have that kind of state level legislation. New York also has someone that is being made. I think at the federal level, there has also been in the Congress. I think there's also discussion about similar acts. That is an obvious case. Another cases are like limiting the use of AI in political campaigns, and for obvious reasons. I think that's also a topic that's not so much controversial. But in between, I think the regulation becomes a bit in the gray area, because as we talk about generative AI, deepfakes, we talk about the negative impacts, but they also have beneficial uses. And this is like years of um, technical development, and generative AI has become one of the most fast-growing industry in this country. So cutting a line, say what is allowed, what is not, becomes difficult. But there are things being discussed, like the executive order from the White House last year in October, suggesting the basically, I think three parties, the AI, generative AI tool providers, social platforms, and computation platforms like Google Cloud, Amazon, AWS, and the the general trend is to say, each of these parties perform some due diligence to help to control the problem. For instance, general tool AI, generative AI tool providers, the EO was about for them to put watermarks in media generated from their tools so that we can later more easily verify these are created. Social platforms, such should like do better filtering and provide indicators to the viewers that what you are seeing, what you are hearing probably are created by AI. And then the competition platforms could potentially, go over, like, if some models are, some models being trained on the platforms that are created by, that are for generating deepfakes, they could, put some guardrails, make sure that this was not used, at least have some agreement from the user that these are not used for any harmful effects. I think as a as consequences of this kind of legislation, GitHub is the open code sharing repository. GitHub has taken down most of the open source code that can be used for deepfake generation. So I think that's the positive direction, even though I think, as I mentioned at the very beginning, the line is hard to draw, and there are some byproducts of that movement, like, people want to do research of deepfake detection, now becomes a little bit harder to get this code. But anyways, I think that these are where I'm seeing the policies are focusing on, to control various parts, various players, parties in this arena.
And you make a good point there, in the sense that in many times these technologies really are just tools. You can use a tool in a positive way or in a negative way, and admittedly, there's basically a connotation, possibly due to the history and the origin of the word. You say deep fake, people usually aren't saying, "Oh, wow, that's great." But I would love to hear some examples that you've come across as you've been delving on this research journey of taking the technology, which if employed in one way, you could take a turn and it becomes a deep fake that could be problematic. But
Mm.
you take the other turn, and we don't talk about it as much. But I don't want to make the mistake here of just biasing 100% to the negative. So what are some of those, say, positive developments that have come from you, whether it's the generative adversarial networks or some of these other aspects of the technology that can help certain areas?
Well, yeah, absolutely. I think deepfake. Well, I usually use the more neutral term AI generated content instead of deepfakes, because deepfakes, the my definition of deepfakes is misused AI generated content. But the generally speaking, AI generated contents, the technology behind that is called generative AI, can be used for beneficial purposes. For instance, I mean, it saves a lot of costs of making advertisement commercials, especially if we try to do a, like, say we somebody make a commercial and they want to adapt this commercial to different areas, so that some people who are recognized in the local area will be with the subject in the commercial, or will speak different dialects, different languages that the original person cannot speak. So you can use generative AI technology to make that happen, and that saves a lot of time and effort in creating those materials. The other way is, the most recent image generation and video generation that brings a new dimension of creativity. So artists can take use of that, draft ideas. There's a difficult copyright IP issues there, but if we put that along aside, think about what people can now do to visualize their ideas. Just I have some idea, I draft a few paragraphs, and then I can see an image of my idea. That's very powerful. And I think that particularly for I've seen reports that um, uh, uh, young children in school use generative AI to express themselves, or helping autism, kids with autisms actually use generative AI to be able to interact better, understand better, interaction with the world, improving their conditions. I think there are a lot of beneficial use of that. Another beneficial use of this is rehabilitation. People lost their voices, or older adults with dementia or Alzheimer's. They need constant reminder of what they, their past experiences, the faces and voices of their loved ones. Using their own images, voices to help them to memorize, to remember, to memorize, or to recover their lost abilities, speaking abilities, for instance, could also be a very useful tool for them. So, I mean, technology, as you said, is neutral. It depends on how do we use it, right? It's the same. I think the same thing happens for nuclear technology, or gunpowder, even in that sense. um it really depends. What we should do, and what we could do, is promote the beneficial, the positive uses, and understand and limit the negative uses.
And there are these thoughts that with people wanting to possibly take steps to either protect. I know I was at the Charlotte airport recently, and Amazon has this thing where I think you hold up your hand, and it's sort of recognizing your hand, and the TSA has a thing where it's like taking a picture of your face, and so in a sense, you then extrapolate and you say, if my face is available on Facebook and Instagram, and you go on this huge list, and you then think of like public figures, and it's no accident that public figures, their faces thousands or millions of times in all these places. You imagine the more that your face, your likeness, your image is showing up, the easier it is possibly, if somebody wanted to use a system to create something that sounds like you, looks like you, is indistinguishable from you. So is it, if people want to sort of protect whether it's their biometric data, should they be thinking more carefully these days about how they're doing things on social media, or is it basically the case the cat's out of the bag, and if somebody wants to access data, unless you've been living off the grid, it's very difficult to be in a position where you're like, oh, they couldn't access my data at the end of the day. It seems that if you were an individual person wanting to preempt or protect, thinking in sort of a cybersecurity smart way, it seems like this technology might make it fairly difficult to do.
That's true. That's pretty much the situation we're facing right now. In terms of protecting our own data from being used to train a deepfake model of ourselves, um, literally, there's no protection for us at this moment, and very little protection for us. But there's something, I think, being developed. First of all, there's research in this area where we can preemptively, we also use the word proactively, protect our data from being used, or from being used to create deepfakes, or we can trace our data that being used for generating deepfakes. So the idea there is to embed some signal into the data we share on social media. Later on, when this images, voices of ourselves will not appear with any significant visual artifacts for human viewers, but will cause trouble for the machine learning AI models creating deepfakes. But that's still under development. So and even if it's effective on the future data, it will not solve the problem. The legacy data, we already have so much data on social media, right? So I think to solve this problem, another part of the equation is regulations. I think as we're seeing more impacts, negative impacts of deepfakes, the legislative, the regulation efforts from the government is going to be more precise. And that's the trend I'm seeing, especially on the extreme cases, as I mentioned early on, non-consensual pornographic cases or implication in political campaigns. Those are the places where the use of any individual's imagery or personal data for that kind of purposes could be detected and could be limited. But in the long run, I think this is the trend to go. Part of the reason is today we call deepfakes. One day down the road, few years, will be a normality. Because as we're doing now, we're doing a Zoom call, you and I involved here, talking here. What happened in the current computer is the camera take each frame of my image, compress that image, and send over the network to your computer, which is decompressed, and then you start to see my faces there. But you can imagine that one day it will be an AI model of me in your computer, and the same, there's an AI model of your face on my computer. And what happened is the camera will capture my image, but reduces down to a much smaller set of data sent through the network and then reproduce using the AI model, almost like create a deepfake of me on your computer. And then if we are now you can depending on how do we decide this, we can talk now I'm in my office or in your home, but we could be like both of us sitting on a table in a coffee shop, Starbucks, and talking to each other in that sense. We can decide where we are meeting each other, in what way, what I wear, right? I could wear a t-shirt, but I could be also in suits and ties, talking to you in that virtual world. So pretty much every images, voices we're hearing have a touch of AI, if not completely recreated by AI. So the question is not about whether this is deepfake or not. I think if that happens one day, the question becomes, if this is an AI model of me that's being used with my consensus, right? So if I agree that, we're talking in this environment, use my AI model, reproduce my presence, that's fine. But the unauthorized use of my imagery in some other occasions is something we should not allow. So I think that as the technology improves, as the AI become more ubiquitous, our technical solution and the stance of the problem will shift with time. And I think the fundamental problem is the old one is the consensus one. Whether this is a great use of my AI model, the same way as if my image was used with my consensus.
Well, I want to thank everyone for joining us today. Thank Professor Siwei Lyu. I think we've covered a lot in roughly 1 hour or so of discussion, but this topic is huge. It's advancing all the time. It feels like every week in recent weeks. You've been listening to our podcast come out, and by the way, you've also seen new models with new reasoning capabilities also coming out. So there are changes literally all the time, and we're doing our best. Everyone's doing their best to just try to keep up. So I want to extend a big thanks to Professor Siwei Lyu for his time and taking us on this incredible research journey today. And certainly keep coming back and listening to our new episodes as we continue to speak to very interesting and impactful guests on the topic of AI and other parts of technology. Thanks again.
Thank you very much for having me. It's my pleasure.